Hi everyone, and welcome to week 7 of our Sweet Childhood Memory Sew Along, hosted by Pat Sloan at her website ilovetomakequilts.com. If you haven't done so already, jump over there, download this week's free pattern, come back here and I'll show you how to do it. We start in the same place we do every week with all of our pieces cut out, and this week I've made no changes to the cutting directions, but I have changed up which colours I'm using and where from the original pattern. I'll also be showing you 2 ways to do the centre square in a square block. We're going to start this week with our half square triangles. These make up the 4 corners of our completed block. To make the half square triangles, we'll take 2 of our background pieces and 2 of our medium fabric. We'll draw a line from corner to corner on the back of our background pieces. We'll put these right sides together with our other piece of fabric and sew 1/4 of an inch on each side of our drawn line. We'll then take these pieces to the cutting mat and slice them in half on our drawn line before pressing them to the darker of the 2 fabrics, in this case my dinosaur bones fabric, and then finally trimming down to our required size of 2.5 inches. This week for the trimming down, I thought I'd mix it up a little bit, and what I've done is created my own little block lock ruler here with my 3.5 inch square. I've simply put 2 layers of painter's tape across my diagonal line, which will butt up on my folded over seam, and then I can measure my 2.5 inches and make sure that I have enough fabric outside that measurement and trim the 2 sides. I then need to rotate the block and the ruler and place my 2.5 inch measurement on the corner of the block, making sure that my makeshift block lock has lined up on my seams, and trim the final 2 sides. We're now going to do the rail units that go in the center of the top and the bottom row and either side of the center in the middle. To do this, we're just simply going to sew these 4 little strip sets together, and in this instance I am going to press open, and then we can move on to the construction of the center of the block. I'll be showing you 2 ways of doing our center square in a square unit today. So the first one is doing a sew and flip on all 4 corners, and I'm going to be using the folded corner clipper tool. To use the folded corner clipper, we place the smaller of our 2 squares in the corner, lining up all of our edges. We then place the folded corner clipper on using our measurement of the smaller square, in this instance 1.5 inches. And this comes with a built-in 1/4 inch seam allowance. We line all this up and we slice off the excess fabric. We then sew using a scant 1/4 of an inch before pressing our corner out and moving around the block. I like to do the 2 opposing corners first, get that all sewn and pressed, and then finish by doing the other 2 corners. This way for me is not so accurate when using such small pieces, so the second method that I show you will be my preferred one and will be the block that I use in my finished product. Note here that I choose to press my seams open on my square in a square, and that is just to ensure that I can have a nice flat block when I'm done. You will notice now that I have this done and it's all pressed that I'm not exactly square. I could fudge that in seam allowances when I do move to the next stage, but I'm going to show you another way now using foundation paper, which gives me a much flatter, nicer and more accurate center. For me, anyway. If you haven't used it before, the Iest Hsu foundation papers are excellent for accuracy, or you could just print your own at home if you are savvy. So to begin with, what you need to do is crease on all of the sewing lines, and that will, because you sew from the back with foundation paper piecing, this just gives you a representation on the back of where your fabric needs to go. In the instructions that come with these papers, it also lets you know what size you need to cut your fabrics. So we're going to line up our center fabric number 1, and I'm using the red in this instance. Now you can secure this with a dab of glue, or in my case I am choosing to use a pin. We then flip this over and we look for number 2. We fold that back and then we trim this back to a 1/4 inch seam allowance. We'll then grab one of our triangles that we previously cut before and line that up on this 1/4 inch seam allowance, fold the paper back out, and we'll stitch directly on the printed line from the back side of our work. So we need to make sure we're putting right sides together here. And then we'll take that to the machine and we'll sew with an open toe foot directly on our line there. When doing foundation paper piecing, it's a good idea to dial your stitch length back, and in my case I use a 1.5. Next, what we need to do is press the piece that we've just sewn out so that it's out of the way. What you've seen me do there is actually the wrong order, but it turns out okay. So we press our piece back, we then go to our next piece, so in this case it's number 3. We trim our seam allowance back, we match it up to our next triangle, we fold that paper back out and we sew once again on that line. And we repeat this again for the other 2. Press, fold the paper back, trim 1/4 inch and do the next piece, and repeat that the whole way around. You will note when I move on to pieces 4 and 5 that I do actually have to tear the paper a little to get my 1/4 inch seam allowance, and that is 100% okay. With our last piece now stitched on, we'll give that one final press before we trim this down on the solid outside line, making sure we maintain our 2.5 unfinished size, and then we will tear all the papers out and get ready for the final block construction. All of the pieces and parts that we need are now made, and so we just need to lay this block out as per the pattern, and you will see it is done in a simple 9-patch construction. We'll start by doing our 2 vertical seams and then our final horizontal seams, and our block for this week will be done. Pressing throughout all parts of this construction will be towards the rail units. You will see as we go through this part, before I start pressing this, I want to press towards the rail unit, but I also want to spin the seams at my two intersections here. So what that creates is the requirement of clipping on either side of that little peak on the center square in a square. That way my seam allowances at the intersections can spin all in the same direction, but the bulk of that point from the square in the square will also point towards the rail unit still, because when we spin the seams, that seam would actually have to press back the other way. So I'm just going to clip on either side of that peak from the square in the square, spin these seams on the two intersections and press it flat before continuing to sew the last piece on. As always, folks, thanks for joining me week after week for these block tutorials. If you haven't done so already, please consider liking my video, sharing it with a friend, hitting that little subscribe button, but most importantly, clicking the little bell icon so you'll be notified of all my future updates. As always, thanks for watching and bye for now.